My name's Lavagnon Ika. I am a professor of project management, founding director of a major project observatory at the Telfer School of Management of the University of Ottawa, and as well associate editor at the International Journal of Project Management. Next slide, please, Cathy. So first and foremost, in true uOttawa tradition, may I ask you to join me to pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. Nous rendons également hommage à tous les peuples autochtones qui habitent Ottawa, qu'ils soient de la région ou d'ailleurs au Canada. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old. Nous honorons aussi leurs courageux dirigeants d'hier, d'aujourd'hui et de demain. Next slide, please, Cathy. Again, welcome to the International Journal of Project Management webinar on the nexus between grant challenges and projects. This webinar comes after a symposium where project management and operation and supply chain management scholars gathered to trade ideas on tackling grant challenges with projects. Next slide, Cathy. At the Academy of Management Annual Congress in Chicago in August 2024, last month, basically. As a matter of procedure, note that the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on IJPM YouTube channel. If you do not want to reveal your name, please change your name or make it anonymous or leave now. Otherwise, the webinar is being recorded like I just said. Next slide, please, Cathy. Now, what is this webinar about? As you know, we live in a world of projects, but we also live in a world of grant challenges. Some call them mega threats. Here, we're gonna call them grant challenges. So we're talking about those most pressing problems humanity faces, such as climate change, unsustainable development, global pandemics, to name a few. These policy-led and sometimes business-driven projects, they seek to tackle grant challenges to achieve what William Easterly, a professor of international development and a former chief economist at the World Bank, would call beautiful goals all over the world. Sustainable development goals come readily to mind, but we know little, however, about how these projects can help tackle grant challenges. Our intent in this webinar is to help prospective authors for the special issue develop their papers for our special issue. In this webinar, we will introduce the special issue and then clarify our own expectations as guest editors for your submissions. To reach that goal, I am accompanied by none other than Professor Dror Etzion. Dror is the Stephen Grossman Endowed Chair of Sustainable Business at the Grossman School of Business at the University of Vermont. Dror, welcome. Dror's research program focuses on grant challenges, the unyielding, intractable problems that characterize the Anthropocene. His work suggests that managing for sustainability through local, open, emergent initiatives increases the recruitment of diverse stakeholders, fosters creativity, and yields impactful outcomes. Dror was at the Desautels School of Business at McGill University before, and he received his PhD from IESE Business School in Barcelona, Spain. His work has been published in prestigious outlets such as Academy of Management Review, Strategic Management Journal, Organization Science, Academy of Management Perspectives, Academy of Management Discoveries, MIT Sloan Management, and Nature Sustainability, to name a few. I'm jealous, and I already told him. Perhaps this is not enough to understand the impact of Dror's work. If I may cite just one example, which is relevant to this webinar, Dror is a co-author of a landmark paper in organization studies. Guess what is the title? Tackling Grand Challenges Pragmatically. In less than 10 years, this groundbreaking paper has been cited about 1,500 times in Google Scholar. I checked yesterday. I was able to corrupt him to join me as a guest editor for the special issue. He has gracefully accepted, and I look forward to learning from him. Next slide, please, Kathy. In terms of organizing, here is today's structure or agenda. First, I and Dror, we are gonna offer a background talk and answer a simple question to get started. That question is, how I got into grand challenges and why this special issue. Then we will provide our own expectation in terms of your submissions and offer a few tips. Finally, a Q&A will follow with MS Teams attendees. I will repeat that you wait until the Q&A and use the chat feature in MS Teams to drop your questions. I will do my best to read them and cover them for the remainder of the webinar, promised. Now, let me get started and answer the question I just asked, how I got into grand challenges. Kathy, next slide. Well, last year, a few project management journal editors joined their forces together to publish a manifesto for project management research. That was published in the European Management Review, the journal of the European Academy of Management. And basically, what we were trying to say is that we need to address grand challenges. There is a strong need there. And most importantly, we were calling for a swift collaboration between project scholars and management scholars. It is within that spirit that I asked Dror to join me to discuss, the nexus between grand challenges and projects. Next slide. But I have had a long-standing interest in grand challenges. It's just that it was not called grand challenges at the time. So I was interested, and I'm still interested in how project management can help alleviate the challenge of global poverty reduction over the world. So we're talking about international development projects here. Projects such as World Bank funded projects, to give just an example. So, I wrote a piece back to 12 years ago titled Project Management for Development in Africa, Why Projects Are Failing and What Can Be Done About It. So that this is just an example of a grand challenge kind of research focused on projects. And more recently, I wrote with an international development economics, a paper that was trying to assess the extent to which projects were subject to over-optimism by their promoters. So we look into a data set of about 3,000 projects, and we were able to show that 60% of them were prone to optimist bias. So if you are aware of the debate in the project management field about whether or not optimist bias is the source of cost overruns and benefit shortfalls in projects, well, this is a sample of World Bank projects, a sample of Great Challenge projects focused on global poverty reduction that I use to look into that topic. Next slide, Kathy. But, during when the pandemic hit, I started thinking about, the kind of projects, programs, and portfolios that were put together to address that challenge. So basically, the question was, how can project management help deal with global pandemics such as COVID-19? So as I was watching the issues surrounding mass vaccination, for instance, in Canada, where our beloved country, Canada, was not able to make it in the top 40 of the countries in terms of mass vaccination performance, I decided to take a look at the subject topic. I was asking myself, why is it so simple, but at the same time so complex for us to understand what is going on in terms of our own Canadian mass vaccination performance. So I wrote a piece in The Conversation to that effect. It was a piece that was initially written in French and then was translated in English by my school. Next slide. So here's the question: how can project management help address grand challenges such as unsustainable development, global pandemics, and climate change? So I asked, a colleague and a friend of mine who happened to be the director of the School of International Development and, have been working on global poverty reduction projects. I asked him to join so that, we can look into the topic head on and use grand challenge literature and, perspective to address the topic. Hence, a piece that we wrote in the International Journal of Project Management 2 years ago, which borrows from, Dror's paper, Dror's and colleagues' paper, and we cheated about the title. So hence, the piece was titled "Tackling Grand Challenges with Projects: 5 Insights and a Research Agenda for Project Management Theory and Practice." So that's more or less how I got into the topic of grand challenges. Next slide. Now, what did we learn, by taking a look at this topic in the field of project management, or I should say at the nexus of the fields of project management and international development? So we realized with my friend Lachlan Monroe, we realized that in our field, we were focused on standalone projects, best practices, linear means to end sort of rationality, and managerial processes, what our sustainability scholars in the field of project management, they call sustainability by the project. And then, we ask ourselves the following question: can this help address grand challenges? And we could not see much guidance in terms of how to tackle grand challenges. Then we look into international development literature and donor aid in particular. There we realized that a subtle thing was going on. They were not just focused on projects because, they themselves realized that projects tend to fall short in terms of dealing with the grand challenge of global poverty reduction. So they shifted to what they call the program approach, and they are using some of the portfolio approach or consortium or network approach to tackle grand challenges. And the managerial philosophy that was dominant in that field was result-based management, basically. Here again, you have some linear rationality going on, but you have some collaborative rationality. So linear rationality is still dominant, but you have some collaborative rationality. And I'm quite sure Dror will talk about, the importance of collaborative rationality and things like partnership later. And here they are more focused on the extent to which the project is supposed to contribute to sustainability in the long run, especially when the donor funding is over. But still, we have little guidance in terms of addressing grand challenges there because the focus is on small, discrete problems. And then the closest we can get to addressing head-on grand challenges, as we learned from our case study of the grand challenge of sustainable development in a chapter we wrote in a sustainability book by Gilbert Silvis and Martina Hueman, the editor-in-chief of International Journal of Project Management, is that you need to be operating at the national development level or the country level or the regional level. Think about, the European Green Deal, for instance, or think about the NEPAD, the African Development Program. So here you have broad and holistic approach, often in line with global SDGs or overarching agenda at the European level, for instance, or at the regional level, like I said, for NEPAD. So here, the dominant rationality is mostly collaborative, and the sustainability focus is the global SDGs, and you have a direct focus on grand challenges. So it's quite interesting to see what's going on there at the nexus between project management and international development. Next slide, please. And then in so doing, I'm building on my knowledge of the nexus between these two fields, and I realized that basically those two fields, project management being focused on the delivery of projects, obviously, and international development being focused on the delivery of the goal of global poverty reduction. I realized that they share two things. No, one thing, most importantly in common. They are all geared to organizing work and delivering change. But they also differ in terms of the temporal tensions or temporal focus. So you see, they are like strange bedfellows in the sense that project management tend to focus on short-term success. I mean, the delivery of the project on time within budget and specifications or quality. Even PMI, I was at the Project Management Institute Global Summit last week in Los Angeles. Even PMI is trying to shift from this narrow perspective. But PM historically has been focused on that short-term success, especially with a single sponsor point, with a single sponsor perspective. And conversely, in the field of international development, you will realize that the focus has always been on the long run and the impact on stakeholders and society. And that's quite interesting, the finding when it comes to addressing grand challenges. So in this paper we wrote, when project management meets international development, what can we learn, with a few colleagues? We use the term global challenges. We did not use the term grand challenges at the time, but we were talking about the same thing, basically. Next slide, please, Kathy. So that's my take in terms of how I got into grand challenges. Now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague and friend Dror to simply answer the same question, how he got into grand challenges.
Yeah. All right. Good morning. Thank you, Lavagnon. That was a great introduction, and I appreciate how you told people about me a little bit. I would like to say that actually, you're the one who's really driving everything here. I've come to know you over the last few years, and your charisma and energy and amazing networks are really quite inspiring to see. And I'm very happy to have been invited to participate in this and other efforts that you're organizing. And it's really a great honor for me. And I'm learning a lot because, as you'll soon learn, I'm not really a projects person. I'm a little bit more of an organization theorist. So once again, thanks to Lavagnon, thanks to Kathy for organizing today's seminar. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'll also kind of give just a little bit of background about myself and how I got into this topic and what I'm trying to do. I think I'm a management scholar a little bit by accident. I kind of imagined that I would be something else in my life earlier, and I've always been drawn to nature and environment. So that's kind of my introduction to this, is less maybe on social and health issues, a little bit more on the environment, the natural environment. And at some point, this interest kind of merged into an academic interest on how organizations can actually promote and do less damage, I guess, to the environment. So that's been kind of the background inspiring me in all my work, some kind of practical component to it relating to actual positive impacts on the earth. When I talk about how does sustainability and organizations, how do those things connect? Sometimes I start with this slide that you're probably looking at and wondering why it's here even. You may have already kind of looked at the axes. We have on the bottom the year, so that's the movement of time. On the left, we have the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. So obviously, as that goes up, heating increases. And then kind of below the line of the graph, we see these bands, which you've probably seen, indicating how much or how little the temperature is above or below average. So light blue or darker blue means it's been below average. And as the bands become more and more intensely red, then of course the heat is rising, and this is obviously known to everybody. But the thing that I want to highlight in this slide, the one last piece that it incorporates, is the work of government, intergovernmental organizations trying to combat the issue of climate. And you'll see here the whole history from Rio and Kyoto, and then Paris and Copenhagen, and so on and so forth. And I think what this picture tells us is that this has not been a resounding success, right? I mean, it seems as if these events come and go, and the progress is really maybe not major. Now, of course, a counterfactual could be that this would have gone even hotter, and it's probably true that it would have gone even worse, maybe without these. But at the same time, if we're trying to discern any progress, any kind of reduction of the heat and the emissions, clearly these efforts are not really bending the curve. Literally, they're not bending the curve. As you can see here, it's a straight line going forward. And I think the reason that I emphasize this is that it's just important for us to acknowledge and accept that, as frustrating as it is, this is not going to solve the problem. And we can't just say, oh, government needs to do X and the United Nations must do Y, and all those people at the top of the hierarchies should do the hard work for us. I think many of them are very well intentioned, but if we just look at the reality of things, they're not really making much progress. And that's important. It's like, well, we can't punt, we can't just hand it over to them and say, well, you fix it for us. And that's when I talk to executives and I do all my teaching, is like, well, we would like to hand it over to them. It's probably correct that they should be doing more, but we just don't have the luxury to state that anymore. Next slide, Kathy, please. So I emphasize here, there are several levels, and we were just talking about the policy level. So obviously these would be wonderful things, that we would have more and smarter carbon pricing, that we would have a lot of investment in public transportation, that our building codes would be more stringent and require, greater insulation and more energy efficiency and so forth. To some extent, that's outside of our scope. These are kind of at the political level, and my interests are less around that. And Kathy, can you bring up the next piece of this slide? And then often also people want to talk about how we should behave, right? Many times when I teach, people are listening to me, but then their questions really are, well, should I become a vegetarian? And if I start riding a bike, will that make a big difference? And people are very interested and anxious and willing to do personal change, which is, of course, valuable. And I encourage everybody to do that. But again, it's like when we're talking about organizations, it's not necessarily the lever that we want to push. So I advocate for the middle layer, which Kathy will introduce in just a second, which is an organization level approach. And so that's kind of my, where I'm coming from, not just necessarily around projects and grand challenges, but, let's recognize that organizations have and should have an increasingly greater role in contributing to resolving sustainability grand challenges. And here again, the emphasis is on climate change. And there are things that organizations need to do that are not policy and that are not individual behavior. And I encourage research in general, I think for this venue as well, but to focus on those types of things. That's really where we have added value. That's where we have skill. That's where we have intellectual capital to try to promote this intermediate, this kind of meso level between the policy and the individual behaviors. That's where I work. That's my background. That's what I think I can help people maybe to try to do things that are more significant and more meaningful. So that's just a little bit about me, how I see myself and how I position myself in the whole issue around sustainability. Next slide, please, Kathy. And just kind of repeat to some extent what Lavagnon was saying. And this is a kind of a slide that I use often to introduce this idea of grand challenges. And you've probably heard many, many times this idea that we need a moonshot effort to solve X. You know, a moonshot effort would be to solve climate change. A moonshot effort maybe to get vaccines rolled out. We need to do an Apollo project sometimes, and I think that's even more questionable. People use the analogy of the Manhattan Project, you know, to build like a huge thermonuclear device. I don't particularly like that metaphor so much. But people kind of take this approach or this kind of viewpoint like, oh, this was a resounding success. How could we take that? How could we kind of take that? I think there was a lot of passion and a lot of interest and a lot of desire to succeed. How could we replicate that and apply that to a different type of problem? And to me, in many ways, that's very, very misguided, actually. I think for our grand challenges, which I'll talk about and characterize in a moment, it does not seem to actually be the right thing. And I also want to remind people that the same folks who had this resounding success with the Apollo missions, also 2 out of 5 space shuttles blew up, right? So it's like, it's not that this is a guaranteed success. These high, high difficulty activities, you put all your eggs in one basket. And if everything really goes well and your team is built well and you have enough resources and your project management is excellent and so on and so forth, then there's a likelihood of success, but it's far from guaranteed. So people kind of forget sometimes the failures that this approach can have. And we, even in the same context of space missions, we realize actually that this is not a foolproof approach. But more generally, I think this type of project kind of is really characteristic of a typical, or to me, as not somebody who's an expert in project management, but it seems like it's kind of a prototypical projects. Like John F. Kennedy announced in the early 60s that he's setting a mission to put a man on the moon, and he said a man on the moon, not me. A man on the moon by the end of the decade and bring him back safely to Earth. So that's like a really well-defined project. Here's what you need to do. Here's what success looks like. Here's what this means in terms of like your KPIs. And then it was executed in actually a very conventional but very effective project management style. There was an organization called NASA. They got resources. They built a whole layer of management. They broke the problem into pieces. Let's design a rocket. Let's design life support. Project managers put all those pieces together. And it was well executed. I think it's kind of, to me, it seems like a textbook case of a good project. And so you can see that linear thinking, right, where you kind of have a goal, you define the problem, you evaluate all kinds of possible scenarios to get to a solution, and then you execute it well. And again, in this case, it succeeded. It doesn't always succeed. Kathy, if you could show the second half of the slide. I think, what we call a grand challenge or a wicked problem. And I think there's one more thing to show there, Kathy. Is often what we can characterize those in systems. And there's, again, I'm sure for this crowd, all of this is very well known, but there are feedback loops. You start to solve it and it kind of pushes back. The problem becomes the solution. The solution sometimes becomes the problem. And you have a lot of interacting things and you never really solve the problem, right? There's no end here. You can see these arrows kind of basically circle back constantly to where they were. And so that approach, that understanding of wicked problems, I think where I feel is the biggest misunderstanding or misapplication of management research is that you're trying to solve problems on the right side of the slide with approaches from the left side of the slide. And so you're not applying correctly to the type of problem, you're applying a solution that is actually suited to a different context. So this mismatch between the type of problem and the type of solution is what I find is really hobbling us in terms of our approach to resolving grand challenges. Next slide, please. And here it is. I think maybe in terms of like a more crisp, a set of characteristics and features. So again, the left is the moonshot types of problems, but wicked problems are, not clear. So like when we say sustainability, what do we really mean? When we want to say we want to stop climate change, what does that, really mean? How do we go there? When can we declare success, right? When that person from the moon came back to the Earth successfully, then that was a success. When do we resolve? When do we decide? Okay, we've won. We've attained the goal. Much more difficult, I think, with wicked problems or grand challenges. clearly a lot of interdependencies. I mentioned environmental issues, and of course, but there's a lot of social issues. And if we look at the map of the Sustainable Development Goals, we could see how the issues kind of are very mingled and intermixed with each other, very interdependent, as opposed to this kind of bubble that happened in the Apollo missions. It was like separate from the entire part of society, from the rest of society. It was done detached and kind of resolved independently from anything else. And the management style at NASA, I think, very well known, very hierarchical style. That is not often suitable for wicked problems. Lavagnon mentioned earlier, collaboration, partnerships, and I think that's everybody recognizes that those types of less hierarchical relationships are very important for solving these types of problems. So a little bit more specificity around the distinctions. Next slide, please. And this is what I've been exploring and trying to get some traction on over the last, I guess, a decade now. The piece that kind of maybe is better known is the one on the left here, tackling grand challenges pragmatically. So it does get cited a little bit, but I think it gets read much less than it actually gets cited. It's not an easy piece. Even when I read it today, I'm not sure I understand it entirely. And the key pieces may be beyond the fact that it touches upon grand challenges, this notion of pragmatism, which is a philosophical concept, I think very suitable for grand challenges. It's talking about how to make incremental progress towards big goals, as opposed to kind of having big goals and trying to work backwards from them. So pragmatism is a key part of it. If you're interested, it's explored a little bit in here. And then robust action is also kind of a concept taken from the world of chess masters originally. I don't know if you know this background or if anybody here plays chess. It turns out that the best chess players don't really have amazing computational skills, and they could understand billions and billions of possible permutations of the next steps all the way to the end game. They basically know how to build a good position, which gives them strength going forward. And that's the idea of robust action. How can you create a situation for yourself in which you have lots of options, in which you have a lot of flexibility, in which you can attain your goals with a higher degree of success, but it doesn't mean that you know exactly what success will look like or exactly how the end game will play out, but you're kind of setting yourself up to succeed. So those ideas are elaborated and set forth in this paper. Easier versions, I think, with some tweaks and modifications, are in the papers on the right. Journal of Cleaner Production, I think, is maybe the most straightforward elaboration. That's the one on the top right here. And then the one called Management for Sustainability was even written for natural scientists. That's in Nature Sustainability, to try to get this notion out. What is management really, and how could it be applied? So there's been additional work on this topic, but the key ideas are the same. Next slide, please. And basically, the kind of the key diagram from that 2015 tackling grand challenges piece is really here. And again, like I said, somewhat difficult and fuzzy concepts. But let me try to explain it very briefly. So you'll see here three kind of on the bottom left that are key to that theorization. It's called participatory architecture, multivocal inscription, and distributed experimentation. Very, very dense. I apologize for that. But I think, what we're trying to do, or what we try to do, is to push back against some of the more kind of, I think, superficial ways of thinking about how to tackle grand challenges. So one is, we have to get everybody on the same page. That's like something that people says, we have to build consensus. Or people say we have to explain the problem so that everybody understands it. And I think all of those things are kind of detrimental and useless. It's very hard to persuade people what is important and what is not. It's very hard to convert people to an ideology that they do not like. It's very hard to explain to people what to prioritize. All of these things I find are not realistic in terms of how we want to actually create change in the world. And again, if we inject a little bit of like the present day world, I think this is increasingly true, right? People are in their own bubbles of information. They have their own ways of viewing the world. And it's clear that I'm not going to persuade many other people that climate change is an important thing. If they already have these, but I think, you know, rather than despair, we also have examples of how people are able to work even though they don't agree on the goals, and even if they don't agree even on the facts. And I think that's what we're trying to elaborate here through this notion of multivocal inscription. How can you make progress even though people don't agree on what it is that you're trying to obtain? And I think that the best example, the one that consistently strikes me as resoundingly successful, and an example of this approach is the amount of renewable energy in states in the United States like Texas and Nebraska and Iowa, who are not known for their advocacy of climate change, who are not known for being on the, you know, the political side of the spectrum, which sees this as a huge issue. But nonetheless, if we think about what they're doing in terms of contributing to reducing climate catastrophe, it's actually very, very significant. So you could attain the goals that you want even without persuading people that they should be part of that crusade. And I find that a very powerful example. There are many other examples, by the way. I have a little collection of these types of ideas around food choices and around all kinds of ways that people interact and collaborate actually without agreeing on things. And so that's the idea here, is that really you don't have to kind of go through that pathway of really establishing consensus and rules and a big organization in this looser, more distributed manner, with people participating in different ways, and to the extent that they feel comfortable, you can gradually over time, and that's the significance of this arrow here, over time you create new ideas, you generate new types of solutions, that's novelty generation, and you keep people involved. It's like, okay, maybe I'm not fully on board here with a political agenda, but I can see some value in it for me. And I think this is a much more realistic and, again, pragmatic. This is really what it means, this pragmatism from a philosophical background. It's a more pragmatic way to try to make progress on the issues related to sustainability, which are very fraught from an ideological perspective. So that's the approach that I've been advocating and that I think does have some success. Next slide, please, Kathy. But this is kind of, as I've said, this has been mainly theoretical. There's some case studies which I think are elegant and insightful and illuminating, but I want to kind of go back to how I started my career. It's I really feel this intense need to be more directly involved in, or to more directly contribute to really solving these problems and not just theorizing about them and talking about how it could be. And for me, the part that's been missing, and that's why I was very excited when Lavagnon contacted me to be part of this kind of a research stream, is that this needs to be translated into really projects, things on the ground. So if we want to really tackle the climate crisis, again, that's my main passion, we have to do so much in terms of infrastructure, in terms of changing workflows, in terms of reducing certain things, increasing other types of things. I don't know if you know this book. This is by John Dror, the venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, who's become quite a vocal advocate for sustainability. And he wrote out a book called Speed and Scale on how to solve the climate crisis. And he identified 10 domains. As you can see here, you probably looked at the list here. And when I read this book, I was first impressed because it's nice. It kind of sets out some KPIs. It's kind of a bit more of a project management book, by the way. I kind of think, or I give it to my students and say, look, this is just a list of to-dos. This is a list of projects that we need to undertake in order to obtain that goal of reducing the severity of the climate crisis. And Kathy, if you'll go one slide further, we can see two examples here, right? Decarbonizing the grid. And, again, this I imagine this as basically a sequence of projects that people from all over the world have to do, not collectively necessarily, but it's a collection and aggregation of thousands of projects that people will do in order to obtain this kind of objective or goal or aspiration maybe that we have in front of us. And so for me, that's the part that's been missing. How do I connect these ideas that we've had around distributed experimentation and inscription and architecture and so on and so forth to the more concrete, specific types of projects that really do have to happen? So those ideas and those coalitions have to translate into some tangible, on-the-ground activities to reduce the impact of climate. And that's what I'm hoping that I could contribute to, and that we will see, I guess, in the submissions related to this special issue. And I think that's it for me right now.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks a lot, Dror, for your lecture. Very interesting and very informative. So now you have a sense of where we're coming from, both Dror and myself, in terms of our relation to the topic of grand challenges. Now the question is, why this special issue? So to sum up, and Dror has been able to make it clear the distinction between tractable problems and intractable problems or wicked problems. So building on that distinction, when we're talking about grand challenges here, we're not talking about missions such as moonshots or moonshot projects. That's not what we are talking about here. We're talking about, wicked problems such as climate change, and they tend to call for policy responses most of the time. And Dror show you a certain number of policy responses over time in terms of climate change. I'm talking about the beautiful graph that he shows, and the red color that is getting intense, and to kind of give you a sense of how the heat problem is getting more and more acute over time. So that's more or less our focus here. We're not talking about discrete and tractable problems. The very way the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation talk about grand challenges, for instance, in the health industry sector. That's not our focus here. So this definitional kind of precision is quite important, and we'll advise you to think deeply about, what you call a grand challenge and how you define it to be able to be consistent with the literature. That being said, policy research offers some insights, some key insights. So Dror talks about moonshots or missions. So what is a mission? A mission is a sort of moonshot kind of policy that sets up, as Dror said a few minutes ago, an ambitious target about a desired future. So a good example was landing a man on the moon, and galvanize both the public and the private sector to achieve that ambitious goal. So you can learn from it, but as Dror demonstrated, it falls short in terms of tackling grand challenges such as unsustainable development, climate change, or alleviating economic inequality. So they offer little guidance. The policy research, which is quite interesting and insightful, offers little guidance when it comes to organizing projects or leading projects or delivering projects. That's where project management can help. Next slide, Kathy. So the research problem and question that we seek to tackle here is, okay, we live in a world of grand challenges, like I said. We also live in a world of projects, but we read little at the nexus. How can we change that? So how can project management help tackle grand challenges? So that's the question that we're trying to focus on in this special issue. Next slide, Kathy. Now, so Dror was able to make that clear. So you have the type of project that can fit with tractable problems, like landing a rover on Mars. And you have the type of project that can fit with what we call grand challenges in this webinar. So, and they speak to different kind of policies or different kind of forms of missions. You have the old form of missions that is interesting, inspiring when it comes to delivering moonshot projects, for instance. And you also have the new forms of missions, which we're going to call, using Mazzucato's work, grand challenge-driven missions. And they can be fitting for, delivering grand challenge projects. So you see the type of problem here is different. The type of risk and uncertainty distinction is different. I'm not going to go in detail here, but you will also understand that the role of context is key in the delivery of grand challenges. Dror was talking about collaboration, partnership, distributed experimentation. You cannot do that if you do not understand the context in which you are operating and who are the key stakeholders, their expectations, what they want. Okay, so here, we have much more focus on the delivery of socio-ecological value as opposed to the mere economic value that was fitting for the old form of missions. So in a sense, what I'm suggesting is that Grand Challenge project would differ from moonshot projects, and therefore the traditional literature in project management might not be fitting to address the higher complexity and uncertainty that characterize what we call Grand Challenge projects here. And you know that the conventional project management literature, as Dror put it, is much more effective in addressing the challenge of moonshot projects as opposed to the managerial challenge that Grand Challenge project would pose. Next slide, Kathy. So why is this important? It means that we need a style of project management that is different. And we also need a different type of scholarship here. The question is, are we ready for it? Because here we're talking about the problem-driven, not the theory-driven research. And the focus is not just on value creation. The focus is also, and much importantly, on value distribution. And that's quite important. And when you're talking about value distribution, you need theories that can help you shed light on the process of value distribution among stakeholders. I study international development project or global poverty reduction project. One of the issues is how do you build capacity so that this project can be useful to the poor and the marginalized people, so that the value being created is not just useful for the government, not just useful for the international development agencies, but they're also, effective as a process for, end users, which tend to be poor and marginalized people, as I just said. So therefore, you need the Grand Challenge topic is a sort of umbrella topic. And when you're dealing with an umbrella topic, then you might want to have more theories or a pluralistic kind of theorizing in pluralistic context. And that's a perspective that can be useful for those that are working on the special issue submission. As we demonstrated, we have also a micro-macro divide being at play where, perhaps a project portfolio program or network approach can be your closest bet when it comes to, getting close to the delivery of these Grand Challenge projects, as well as the notion of collaborative rationality, which is key. In the interest of time, I'm going a little bit fast, but you can ask questions of any of these topics if you want later. So we also, most importantly, we need to break with a mental model of a project having a predefined product, result, or service. That's a point that was clear-cut in Dror's talk. And we also need a collaboration between project scholars and operation management, and the operation management or, the business and management scholars in general. Next slide, Kathy. So now, let us talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts for this special issue. Dror, feel free to interject anytime if you want. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to suggest is that I would like to invite us to avoid more of the same. Based on what we just said about the limitations of the conventional or the mainstream project management literature, which is more fitting for moonshot projects than for Grand Challenge projects, it will not be, let's say, productive to, have a simple deep dive into the mainstream project management literature. It will lead you astray. So what we want here in this special issue is a deep dive into a Grand Challenge stream, not just of the project management literature, because it's thin in the project management literature right now. Otherwise, the work that we are doing here is not going to be that, impactful. is fin, right? Because it's fin, I would like to ask you to do a deep dive as well in the management literature, because that's where the debate is happening. So that's the first tip. The second one is that, you may not want to overlook the key background context surrounding the kind of Grand Challenge projects that you're talking about. So you need to educate reviewers here. Remember that most of the reviewers are not familiar with the Grand Challenge literature. And Dror and myself are not going to be the only one making the calls for your papers. We have to turn to the pool of reviewers available out there for the journal. So therefore, one of the things that we would like to strongly ask you to do is to describe the nature and complexity of the focal Grand Challenge that you are talking about, as well as the project that focal Grand Challenge calls for. You need to make clear whether the sample projects are typical or not in the PM literature. So if you're talking about net zero projects, do you take them to be, typical, the project typical of the project management literature? Or what kind of net zero project are you talking about? Does it fit with, the sort of moonshot kind of project, or does it fit with a Grand Challenge kind of project? You need to be clear in terms of this distinction. Otherwise, this will lead the reviewers a little bit astray, and they won't understand what you're talking about. That will create confusion. And whenever you add to confusion, that's not good for your paper. So that's the second tip. The next slide, please, Kathy. The third one is you need to avoid to just summarizing the literature. We want you to problematize the literature and, most importantly, reflect on the gaps in both project management and the management literature when it comes to Grand Challenges. That will help, let us say, specify that will help specify your theoretical contribution. So we don't want papers that have no theoretical background at all or perspective. And I'm being broad here. So what I'm saying here is that you need to make it clear the background theory or lens or perspective. Remember what I just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dror, Grand Challenge is an umbrella topic. It's not a theory. It's an umbrella topic. So to refer to Grand Challenges and think that you already have a theory, that's not true. It's wrong. It's limiting. So therefore, what you need either a theory or a lens or a perspective. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to make theoretical contribution. And you know that this journal wants theoretical contributions. That's quite clear. Okay? So we want you to make it clear what the background theory is, if you have a theory. For instance, if you are interested in stakeholders and the role that they play in the delivery of Grand Challenges, a theory might be new stakeholder theory. Okay, or a lens might be multi-sessional governance, for instance, or multi-stakeholder governance, right? So you need to be clear what the theory is, what the lens is, or what the perspective is. So that's quite important. Next slide, please, Kathy. So you need to provide a deep discussion of findings. So therefore, what we want is not just good enough to say, okay, yeah, here is what we found. And the project, the project management literature, let us say, supports our findings. No, what we want, remember, your work is going to be focused first and foremost on Grand Challenge projects. And we don't have too much being written on Grand Challenge projects in the project management literature. So therefore, what we want here, you need to specify first and foremost how the Grand Challenge stream of both the project management and the management literature and the broader PM literature supports or contradicts with your findings. So you need to start with the little literature available there in both literatures. in terms of discussing your findings, because that will make your findings more salient and your contribution even more salient. And it's quite important to articulate, to finish, what your paper adds as novel theoretical insights. It doesn't matter if you are using a theory or a lens or a perspective. At the end of the day, we want these novel theoretical insights to be clear-cut, because that would kind of help, tease out your theoretical contribution for the paper, which is a key requirement for this journal. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've reached the point where we are about to finish this first part of the webinar. So it's time for your Q&A, and after that, we're gonna wrap up. So Kathy, how are things going on in the chat? So please, again, put your question in the chat.
Shy.
Yeah, people are a little bit shy. Okay. Yeah, that is a small challenge, not a grand challenge, right? So,
Yes.
So put your question in the chat.
Yeah, we have one person who raised their hand. Maybe we can invite them to ask their question.
Yeah, go on.
I think it's Ambi.
Yes, thank you for the invite. Thank you, Lavagnon, and thanks Laura as well for really insightful presentation. Thank you. I was just wondering, you did mention that you welcome a deep dive into management literature. Obviously, that's where a lot of grand challenges conversations emerge, or is building up. But also, in my quest to write a paper for this special issue, I also noticed that there is a bit of that conversation also in the sociology literature, particularly when you're looking at it from a developmental perspective, like you mentioned earlier, aspects of agencies, of beneficiaries, the sort of stakeholder dynamics of grand challenge and stuff like that. I wonder, is that also welcome if one touches on those literature as well? Then my second question, and it's going to be a really quick one, is in the examples that Dror, for example, pointed out in the grand challenge, I didn't quite see, I don't know if that is exhaustive in terms of what you're looking at, because again, in my paper, one of the approach or the grand challenge that we're looking at is aspects of forced displacement, which comes from climate change, intersection, war, crisis, all those things, and of course the role of project management and projects in addressing those that kind of grand challenge. Is that also welcomed in the list of the sort of grand challenge you're looking at? That's just my question.
Thanks a lot, MB. I know that management scholars, they love sociology literature, so the first part of your question will be to Dror.
Yes, that was well said, Lavagnon. It's true that many of us, and myself included, do have a lot of support and appreciation of the more general sociological literature. So absolutely, I think that would be quite welcome. And if I may also, to the second question, I think displacement is obviously a very important consequence of many of the grand challenges that we're not tackling very well. It's really leading to migration, and I think those in turn will create a lot of additional, or are already creating a lot of upheaval and uncertainty and a lot of very negative reactions around the world. So clearly that, to me at least, is well under the umbrella of a grand challenge, because the movement of and the migration of people, both from an ethical perspective and also from an ongoing governance perspective, is just a tremendous challenge, obviously.
Yeah, so I agree with all Dror said. So basically, your paper is welcome, my dear. Thanks a lot, MB. So in the chat, I can see that there are a few comments and questions. So strategies being executed through improved operations. Yes. So on time, on budget to specs are constrained, not objectives of projects. Great. We can agree with that. Thanks so much for this great initiative. It's very risk that the paper fits the expectation of the SI editors, but could be rejected by the journal editor. No, the journal editor is not going to, reject your paper if we, the special issue editors, we agree with your paper and we want to publish it. Basically, the challenge will be with the reviewers. So if 3 reviewers unanimously advise against your paper, it's going to be difficult for Dror and myself to save your paper, basically. Dror, would you agree with that? Yeah. So you need to convince the reviewers as well. That's how the game is being played in science, right? Are you going to provide with the infrastructure required for those projects? So that is not clear to me what you meant, Tabiso. What do you mean? Is Tabiso around? No. Okay. So I'm going to move to the next question. Are conceptual framework type of papers also acceptable? Yes. The answer is basically yes. So yes, the papers are not necessarily going to be all empirical. We welcome empirical papers. We also welcome conceptual papers. So Rehab, I would like to ask, will it be fine to focus on more than one grand challenges that the project is going to address? Dror, what do you think? I have a sense, but
yeah, well, I would say again, because these issues are always very intertwined. We just talked about that, with the issue of the displacement, which is kind of a result, but also a precedent for other types of problems. It's, I think, sometimes overly simplistic to say that this is only with one very clearly well-defined grand challenge. So that wouldn't be a constraint in my view at all. I would at the same time caution for people not to take their topic and turn it into like this is the biggest thing and it encompasses everything and it's touching on all of these other types of things. So I think some also to be a bit judicious in terms of the utility and the extent to which you want to kind of wrap over everything. And just because you could include maybe 7 different grand challenges doesn't mean that that's a useful thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great advice, great piece of guidance. Rehab, I think that you will see that there are a few projects that touch upon different grand challenges at the same time. The keyword that Dror was using in his matrix, interdependency, says it all, right? So basically, you can have a project that is supposed to tackle climate change and at the same time tackling global poverty reduction, which is SDG number 1. And post-displacement comes to mind, right? So it can create challenges in terms of different grand challenges, right? So now the next question or the next remark is about temporary medical facility project as a measure to deal with COVID-19, for instance. The question is whether this topic is suitable. Yes, as long as the project is fitting for grand challenges, then it's suitable. The question for you is whether or not it fits with the traditional literature of project management or it fits with the emerging grand challenges literature. So that's where the difficulty will lie, in my view. I don't know if you have a comment on that, Dror.
I don't know if I want to comment specifically. I don't know the context well enough. I would like to caution that I personally will be thinking about the context because I know, it seems to me that people are trying to use the grand challenges label to kind of get a bit more interest in their research. It's kind of maybe a bit fashionable. And so I feel sometimes people are stretching it a bit too much. I think the research is very useful, but it's not necessarily best presented in this kind of, they're kind of pushing it a little bit too forcefully into the grand challenges rubric. So I had a chance to review a paper recently about grand challenges, but it was a paper about cryptocurrencies. You know, one could make an argument that it's grand challenge related. I'll be very honest with you, I was not convinced that that was the way to go for this specific project. It's clearly something that a lot of people are interested in, and maybe it can solve certain types of things. And you know, but I felt it was a bit of a stretch. So I don't want to say that we'll be accepting every kind of project and every kind of contemporary issue under the Grand Challenges rubric. So do be a little bit thoughtful in terms of really, for example, as Lavagnon was mentioning, is it related to one of the SDGs in a very clear way? Or, you know, can you really present it in such a way that it's kind of a socially desirable outcome that you're trying, that, you know, manifests around a large scale, different people that are being impacted. So those are the types of things that I think are easier to put under this umbrella term of a grand challenge.
This is well said. I'm going to put it differently. If you try to force fit things into the topic of grand challenges, we're not going to consider them for this special issue, because that's not what we want to achieve here. What we want to achieve is a contribution to the literature of grand challenges, and therefore, you know, we'll be picky in terms of what you name grand challenges in your paper. So the best way to avoid this kind of confusion and to ensure a fit for your papers is to a special issue, is to send us your own abstract, and then we will tell you if we are convinced or not. We have been doing that already for many submissions. That's why we are asking you to run your abstract for us, and then we'll have a genuine conversation with you in terms of whether or not the grand challenge that you are talking about is really a grand challenge or not, at least from our perspective. Are there any other questions? Let me check the new messages. Okay. So the next one is, okay, is it possible to focus on multiple programs addressing one big challenge? Yes, why not? If you are at the program level or a portfolio level, why not? So portfolio research is welcome here. It's not just, you know, your research is not necessarily going to be at the single, you know, standalone project level. It can be at the program level. It can be at the portfolio level. It can also connect the project level to the organizational level or the strategy level, and so on and so forth. So it can connect the project to the national development plan of a specific country when it comes to achieving the SDGs, for instance. So you have plenty of choices there. You know, because grand challenges is a multi-level issue. So I don't know what you think, Dror.
No, that was very well said. I think exactly. No, fully agree.
Yeah. So, for example, collecting small samples of data to explore and discover how these programs are addressing environmental protection issues. Yes, the answer is yes. The next one here, we are keen to think our paper about the participant architecture. That's Robert. Through the lens of complementary processes to learn from other projects and solutions, and disseminate those in current programs of project with level of openness. And the abstract was okay for infrastructure. I'm not sure I get everything across here when it comes to a question. Robert, you are in the audience. Would you like to speak to your question, please? And to shed light on it? Because it's not clear to me. Are you there, Robert? Maybe not. You know, Robert is, you know, one of the...
yes.
Yes, go on,
sorry,
Robert.
yeah, I am sorry. It's just I couldn't find the button for the.
Nice to see you, Robert. No problem.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, no. So we were really thinking here about grand challenges. So this is infrastructure in response to climate challenges and grand challenges. And we were actually quite fascinated to embrace Dror's concept of participant architecture. So how can we actually open this up to learn from other solutions in mega programs, so largely infrastructure projects that are very large, and conceptualize on that level. So we looked at search strategies and open innovation as a parallel literature. But in reality, we are looking here at case studies. So this is where this was coming from.
Mm-hmm. So thanks a lot for sharing more light on your question. I'm quite sure Dror has the answer for your question.
That sounds great. I think infrastructure development for me, again, as somebody who's not a project management expert, to me that's like a great context. I think it involves exactly that level that we're interested in, because there's some policy guidance there, but it's also kind of organizationally driven. I think it's a never-ending problem. Like we're talking, infrastructure always needs to be updated and improved and developed continuously. And then, as you were saying, it needs to be much more aligned with what we understand in terms of sustainability, in terms of can it handle I guess different types of climate situations, and how will it kind of manage the environment around it well. So to me, that seems like a wonderful context, actually, especially given my interests. I think maybe I was reading between the lines that there's a climate connection here. So to me, it's fascinating. Yeah. I think it's perfect.
Yeah, super. No, I mean, the question was as well mainly because we will touch on the policy context, because in those environments, as you're probably fully aware, the policy is kind of the iterative circle that kind of constructs the surrounding and sets what's possible. So, but okay, super. We keep in touch as well with the abstract and the paper development. Yeah, super. Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, if the type of project that you are focusing on is a policy-driven project, just make it clear in the background context of the paper. If it is business-driven project, just make it clear, because that would help readers navigate the relevant literature. So then, my friend Marcos has a question here. The Grand Challenge theme have topics in common with distant organizational and project studies, such as decolonization, mega project, complex project, among others. Could you tell your opinion about the do's and don't here? Basically, it would depend on the type of project that you're going to focus on, my dear Marcos, and the type of problem that you want to look at. So if the type of problems can guide you towards decolonization, for instance, why not? As long as it is fitting in terms of literature or perspective. I don't know what you think, Dror, about it, please.
I don't know if I have much to add specifically. I would say, and this is probably not at all a response to you directly, Marcus, so I apologize, but maybe just to kind of give people some thoughts of things that maybe are ways to approach research that would be, at least from my point of view, would be particularly welcome. So one thing, for example, that I can say that I feel is very missing, but that I also know is very, very hard to do, is to do some comparative analyses, and especially large N studies. So Lavagnon mentioned one that he's done, and he and I have talked at length about trying to do large N studies, and so I just want to kind of maybe to ensure that people, I don't know if I was reading this correctly, but it seems like there's maybe like a comparative approach here, and I think those are good. I know a lot of studies tend to be, and it's even in the organization work on grand challenges, they're case studies. They're very detailed and elaborate, and they're insightful. But I would also encourage people to think about additional research methodologies, because to some extent I'm feeling that we're not learning that much more from yet another case study about an organization that has, to some extent tackled the grand challenge successfully. And I would like to see different approaches. And I could say, and I hope I'll be able to persuade Lavagnon about this, or already he's persuaded, that if you are doing something a bit more challenging or difficult empirically and methodologically, I think we'll give you some leeway. If you're doing something interesting, different, and novel that nobody has done before, then we'll probably say, this is great. You're forging a path here. You're doing something. You're opening a channel for people to do additional research. You're designing a new approach to study these issues. And even if it's not perfect, and there's some, we'll probably kind of be more supportive of that. If you're doing yet another case study that might be similar to other case studies that have been written about, then we'll probably ask you to do a really good job with that case study, to like have really good data and very good analysis. So just to kind of consider also, or at least my bias would be to support and encourage and be, more open to kind of a novel and different ways of thinking about this and collecting data about it. And being more creative, honestly, because it's sometimes a little bit repetitive, yet another example of another organization doing something through a case study approach. So Marcus, that was probably not at all helpful, but it was kind of something that I've been thinking to say, and hopefully that's useful at least to some of the participants.
Yeah. And by the way, your follow-up question on papers, on the fact that usually papers do not support multiple theories in the same study. Yes, I agree with you, but for us, remember, it's a problem-driven kind of research. So if you need 2 or 3 theories, because if you have 5, that would be very difficult to navigate. If you need 2 theories, no problem. The question is the rigor and the consistency with which you are able to use, them all together. So we have no problem with that, and I don't even need to consult Dror, for saying this. You just need to go through his own papers, and then we see it. So the next question here is project portfolio optimization grand challenges for you? Not at all. Not at all, and that's not the type of paper that we want in this special issue. That's quite clear. So what we are interested in is how a portfolio of projects can contribute to solving grand challenges. That's what we are interested in. We are not interested in the mathematical optimization of portfolio efficiencies and this kind of stuff. No, this is out of scope, quite clearly. Do you have a total number of papers that you limit to in the special issue collection? The short answer is no. You just need to convince, with the editors and the reviewers, and that's it. Your paper will be published. So we do not have, a maximum number of papers that we want. So we are not capping the number of publications possible. Okay, so I guess I could not see other questions in the chat. Does anybody have an additional question before we wrap up? If not,
maybe Lavagnon, I think there was
yes.
there was a question, and I think maybe Kathy would help with. People are asking if they could see the slides. I don't know if we're planning to post them or how those would be available to people, but I think we should make them available.
Yeah, the slides will be made available for sure. The recording will be also made available on the IJPM, the journal YouTube channel, so no problem. Or if you don't have them, just contact me. So, Ami seems to have a follow-up question.
Yes, please. I like the point that Dror made about methodology. And I was just going to follow up on that because in our paper we're kind of trying to push the boundaries of methodologies traditionally found in project management literature. And our paper is coming from, or our research is coming from a bigger grant that we obtained to work with displaced people in Africa. And one of the methodologies that we used was a participatory action research with those displaced people, and we applied an art-based participatory action research in that context. Now, obviously, not all of that is relevant to the paper that we're focusing particularly on Grand Challenge. And I was just wondering how far can we push the boundaries of, typical methodologies in management and organizational research, borrowing from like arts-based. I know storytelling is already part of organizational research anyway. So we're kind of getting into the line of storytelling and not bringing in the arts-based approach really in our paper. I wonder whether there is room for pushing up to the arts-based approach if if that might interest the editors, please.
Go on, Dror.
Well, I think you are definitely pushing the envelope, and as I said, I support that. I think as a methodology, I'm a little bit familiar with that, and I don't think I cannot say anything bad about it. But I think really what you might want to ask yourself is the project part strong enough in here? Because kind of I'm not sure that I'm getting that from kind of your very brief overview, and so I know it's hard to convey the entire context of what you're doing. But you really, I think it's important to remember that the journal is a project management journal, and it's not easy for me immediately to grasp that having this participatory arts-based methodology is really suitable for a project-centered type of approach to grand challenges. But that's like from a very cursory perspective.
My short answer to you, MB, is the proof is in the pudding. It depends on how you put it together. So if you are able to convince us, why would we resist the temptation of, going into uncharted territory when it comes to methodology? Why not? Why not? Okay, so is there any other question in the chat? It seems no. Okay, if there is not any other questions, so it's time to wrap up. So Kathy, could you go back to the slides on the next steps, please? No, not this one. Yes. So if you are interested in this special issue, we already have a number of abstracts, and people are already working on the paper submissions. So basically, if you have any questions about the special issue or you are interested in it, just drop us an email, and you may even send us 1,000 abstracts or submit a paper to IJPM anytime until 31st of December 2026. So this is the first of a series of 2 workshops. The next workshop will give you the floor, and when I say will give you the floor, when I say you, I'm talking about the potential authors. If you have a paper that is good enough, strong enough, and you want to have feedback on it, so you send us the full paper, and then you send us them before submission, of course. Otherwise, if you send it to us, we will simply go through the journal and send it to reviewers. So you reach out to me, and then you will get ready to present your piece and have comments and feedbacks from we, the guest editors, and your colleagues, prospective authors as well. Okay, so, and that deadline is September 2025. Otherwise, what I'm saying is that in 1 year time, we will be doing a second and last workshop focused on paper development. That being said, next slide, please, Kathy. Go on, Dror.
Oh, it's just a kind of a summary slide, really. That there's something that I present is that really our sustainability challenges are not really technological issues, or we know exactly what we need to do in order to solve all of these. We know how to create vaccines. We know how to create renewable energy. We know many things. Obviously, those things will improve, but that's not the problem. What we're really missing is social science and social engineering to get people or to get these types of things happening. And again, my interest in this is because I really think that a lot of the implementation is through projects. So I just wanted to highlight really, and I guess this crowd would know it well, but this is something that I say more often to natural scientists, is that we know what the solutions are, we just don't know how to get them across the finish line in terms of the social organization around them. And obviously, this special issue is focused on that aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point, by the way. So, the insights coming from social sciences can be used to foster advancement in terms of, or progress in terms of project management research, so that it can help tackle some of the most pressing problems that the world faces here. So that's more or less the spirit for this special issue. So thanks to you, Dror, for the webinar. My sincere gratitude goes to our own Kathy for making this happen. What can I do with Kathy? Kudos to Martina, the IJPM editor-in-chief, who has been kind to accept this special issue. Cheers to Taiwo and Costanza for their postings on LinkedIn. And finally, many thanks to our MS Teams attendees and sorry? Many thanks to our attendees for being with us and for their questions. Individually and collectively, let us make the world a better place where no one is left behind, a project at a time. And that's it for this webinar. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful weekend all.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.